life changers, and welcome back to the Transition Puzzle. And thank you again for tuning in. Today we have a new guest and a new topic. So our guest today, his name is Ivan Caldwell. He graduated from Oklahoma State University. He previously worked for DuPont. Currently, he works for SNF in Louisiana. He is a husband of almost 25 years. He has two children, ages 18 and 14. And today we are talking about navigating the changes in agriculture. So Ivan, can you please introduce yourself? Let us know more about you so the audience can learn more about you.
All right, thanks, Pam. So as you said, okay, glad to be here today. So glad to have this opportunity to kind of talk to your viewing audience, if you will. So without a doubt, as you mentioned, as far as the agricultural piece, I'm a farm kid, grown up on the farm, spent most of my adolescence there from that standpoint, and enjoyed the time period that I was on the farm, and I still do farm and own farm land, if you will, now. Probably more of a weekend, just because of my day job takes me away from that standpoint. So we'll get into that probably a little bit later. As you said, grew up a rural community from that standpoint. Actually took a little bit different road, I guess, from there. Always liked always liked math and science and those things. So it led me down the road to engineering. So graduated from Oklahoma State as a chemical engineer. Went into the chemical industry from that standpoint, and kind of traveled to a number of different places, if you will, from there. So even during all that traveling, all those moves, remain connected to the farm, continue to invest time when I had it, and also in funds relative to purchasing my own property and stuff also, and I farmed from a distance there along with my brother and with my other brothers from that standpoint.
Okay. So you have a background in agriculture, and you've been around it all your life. So I am a business professor, and I kind of dabble into the sustainability, environmental sustainability, and a part of that is farming. And so one thing that currently we are hearing is regarding organic foods. Now, I have my opinion about organic foods, but we'll save that for later. So tell me, from the opinion and the standpoint of someone that is in agriculture, that owns land, that does farming, what is organic farming? What is it, and what is it all about?
All right, so first off, I have to say I'm not an organic farmer from that standpoint in our area, and it's not very prevalent in our area either in Oklahoma. So I'm not going to be an authority by any means. For me, the standpoint is around, like most things, there's a certain set of criteria that you have to follow to fall in the organic classification that's set up, depending on what crop that is that you're supplying or what meat source you may be supplying from there. So it's, the farmer would adhere to that, and that allows him to have that organic certification when he sells his food, hopefully being able to take that to market and commanding a premium from that standpoint. So in most things, you'll see farming basically, it's basically business oriented from that standpoint. So you just think about it as far as getting started in farming, it's like starting your own small business from that aspect. And organic farming is probably just very similar to that, trying to cater to a niche market that you're hoping to be able to get a premium for your product.
Okay, so you mentioned transitioning into farming. So we're going to start there, and then we'll talk about the different changes. So if someone is interested, or even you, yes, you grew up on the farm, but then when you left, how did you decide to become a part of this industry? What was some of the things that you experienced, some of the things that you did to become a part of this agriculture industry?
Yeah, I'd probably have to admit that I never was not part of it, is probably the right way to say that. So all through high school, probably started about junior high is when my dad kind of got me started. From that standpoint, we were probably, by the time I hit high school, we were probably business partners, so to speak. So he set me up with a few head of cattle and some hogs, actually, and I actually used hogs to pay my way through college, or at least pay a good portion of it from that standpoint. So it's always been kind of ingrained in me from there. And I just kind of kept up with it because I honestly just enjoyed it from that standpoint, as far as just the to me, going around the field on a tractor is probably the best thinking and concentration time that I get. So I enjoy it from that aspect. So that kept me kind of tied to it, as far as it kind of gets in your blood from that standpoint. You can't kind of get it out without kind of getting that chance to kind of do the farming or the things that kind of put you at ease.
Okay. Okay. So it's more, so so from what I'm hearing, farming, there's a part of it that is self-care, because you talked about driving the tractor around the fields, and that is a good time to basically meditate and think. So it sounds like even within this farming and being in it, from your standpoint, it sounded like it's a mixture of your part of your self-care to keep you grounded and to keep you focused on where you want to go. Would you agree with that?
Definitely from that standpoint. I mean, corporate America has its own sets of kind of issues, worries, angst, if you will. So everybody needs an outlet. Farming is definitely one of mine that I use from that standpoint. So a lot of people take vacation to relax. I take vacation also, but I actually take a lot of vacation and go back to the farm to get the same thing from that aspect.
Oh, I love it, because I don't think people think about farming, being out in the field, driving the tractors, as something that could be self-care and grounding. And I am all a part of, how are you grounding yourself to stay focused on the bigger picture? Because like you said, corporate America, it does have its little ups and downs, what I call politics. Every place has it. So how are you staying grounded and focused on the bigger picture, but not only in corporate America, but just in life in general? What goes around you? How are you protecting your energy so that you can continue to show up and be involved and be grounded for yourself, and also for your loved ones? So we talked about getting into farming. So let's talk about the different changes, because this is 2021. We have all been in this pandemic, and I don't care wherever you're at in this world, you have had changes and you have seen things that are happening because of this pandemic. So tell us, what are some changes that farming, that agriculture has gone through because of this pandemic these last 2 years?
It's it's probably a little bit interesting. So depending on kind of what size you were, right? So kind of the same thing. So you see a lot of industry now having a hard time getting the workforce. So what's the biggest thing you need in farming? You need kind of funds and workers from that standpoint. So I've got enough brothers that we don't necessarily hire external that much. From that standpoint, so that didn't affect us as much, but it did affect from the standpoint around the travel. So as I talked about, I live in Louisiana, farm in Oklahoma, so I used to fly back. From that standpoint, I pretty much drive all the time now. From that aspect, some of that's just got used to it, and it's not as bad of a deal as kind of was before. But also some of that's because of the not really travel restrictions anymore, and can still move around, but I've gotten used to driving, so I've been still driving instead of flying back. So that's probably one piece just in the travel aspects of it. The other piece is, without a doubt, when it comes to, people gathering at the sale barns and stuff, honestly, haven't even been to one in the last 2 years. Some of that's because I'm remote and unable to kind of take that day to go and watch the livestock sale. The other part of that is the sale barn itself that also kind of practicing the same thing around the social distancing in the building and stuff like that, and taking those precautions. So that's probably the biggest thing from there. The other stuff is just kind of the same general precautions that people take as they travel to the grocery store or anything else. So I do the same thing from there. I mean, granted, out in the field, you're able to isolate pretty easily, so you don't have to worry from that standpoint. But most of it's probably the personnel interaction is probably the biggest thing that's changed a little bit. You think about the old time barter system, and every barter ended with a handshake. So this has definitely changed that situation just a little bit. And it's strange for most people, because you kind of get set in your ways and get used to doing certain things, and that kind of touch and agree piece that's not necessarily there as much anymore, for sure, or they're not at all. So kind of figured out different ways from that standpoint, as far as, fist bump, whatever, as everybody's doing to try to maintain that same touch that probably nobody really thought much about it before. But now you kind of miss it a little bit, or it feels a little bit strange at the end of a discussion or something without that. So that's probably the bigger pieces I would say from that standpoint. It's probably more of a human interaction thing. No real effect relative to doing the work, being out around the livestock or anything that it didn't really affect any of that at all.
Okay. Oh, I love hearing these stories of how people adjusted their lives and navigated this pandemic. Because yes, like I said before, it has hit everybody, and how everyone has navigated this pandemic has been different, and getting the different perspectives on how did it change your life or the things that you do, and when it changed, how did you make that adjustment? And so I'm enjoying hearing how even in farming, maybe an industry we never thought of, that it affected, and the different ways you talked about that bartering system, that connection, that sealed the deal, and you couldn't do anything. You couldn't do that anymore, and you came up with another one. So I loved how, when you talked about even during this pandemic, and we were navigating the pandemic, you still, and people in the farming industry still learn just how to be farmers in this pandemic. So I'm loving that. So we talked about the pandemic. Okay, so you said you've been in farming since since you were real young into now. So tell us, what are some of the big changes that you have seen from when you first started to now that has impacted you either positively or negative when it comes to farming?
I mean, it's been lots of changes from that standpoint around pretty much every aspect you can think of. Part of the deal, even from a product standpoint. So you've got varieties of pretty much everything that's a little bit different now. So you can start with, let's just talk about the crop that you grow. So we grow a lot of actually rye in our area for the most part. There's rye, wheat, so cereal grains. Summertime, which we'll come back to relative to, used to be a good bean harvest in the area. So mung beans, not really set up for soybeans as well, or that well. Mung beans, peas, those kind of things. The change in the weather has kind of made summer crops a little bit different. So we'll come back to that one probably. That's kind of a story all by itself almost.
Okay.
But if you talk about as far as cereal grains and stuff, well, you've got a variety of everything. So just an instance for understanding. So I talked about rye. So I think Elbon rye in the area has probably been the staple in the rye planting for probably the last 50 years, possibly, depending on kind of when rye came on the scene. And there's actually new sets of varieties now for a couple of different reasons that's been out from there. So that you even see stuff like that that's been, you know, staples forever that you wouldn't think would have changed, that you've got a new variety that's kind of grown and come out relative to kind of fitting the farmer's needs from that standpoint, depending on what you want. If you go through from the cattle industry itself, which we also raise cattle for that standpoint, you'll see that, you know, just the breeds themselves have actually transitioned quite a bit from there. So we went from, you know, just not to dig too deep into that kind of, I guess, the cattle raising part of it, but just so the group understands is that you went from basically, you know, you buy a cow, you put it out in the field, have a calf from that standpoint, to breeding in aspects such as easy calving from that standpoint. So you got low birth weight. So basically low birth weight means the bull is bred and in basically in his DNA genetics, he's bred in a way to be able to have a smaller calf at birth, but grow faster and still reach the same weight in the same time period or in a faster time period. So that allows the cow to have ease in having a calf, or the first time the cow has a calf has an easy time having the calf with no problems whatsoever. But still do not sacrifice the growth of the offspring, if you will, so you can command the same profit that you would before. So that's another thing around just genetics in general, and the competition relative to that, of being able to breed in different genetics, command a premium, and it's quite an extremely lucrative business from that standpoint. You can just see, if you just go and buy and see the difference between Angus beef, so to speak, from there. So a lot of that's probably the Angus Association doing a really good job around advertising from there, and being able to command that premium from that. So you'll see a lot of things like that that's changed farming from, hey, it used to be just grow your material, take it to the market and kind of get what you get, but it's really a really down from a business strategy of, you got to figure out kind of what fits you best and where you can fit in to kind of also figure out how you can command a premium for what you sell from there. The other aspect of change is just the technology of the change in machinery and the aspects of what it provides now. Granted, all that comes with a very high price tag in a lot of cases, but the technology change is just, it's been huge just over my span, to be honest, of what a tractor now is just as technically equipped as probably the most high performance car that you could ever find from there, that it's going to be computer controlled, fuel efficient, emission efficient, and everything you could think of from there is going to be equipped into it. So it's definitely made the farmer have to change, one, to try to keep up and be efficient in the way they work the field and plant the seed, but also to have to get efficient in ability to be able to operate the machine. And any time you can kind of, that upgrade in technology helps you basically save time in that process. So farming's another one of those that time is definitely money from there. So that's probably the bigger pieces. Is pretty much every place you look, it's been kind of a technology improvement in one way or another. And you've got to kind of do some good research and digging to figure out kind of what things aid you. The one I didn't get into is actually the other piece is actually the fertilizers that you use. Like I said, I'm not an organic farmer from that standpoint. So we do basically look to try to build the soil and maintain it from that aspect. So you're looking into testing the soil, figuring out what nutrients are missing, and figuring out the right amount to put back. More doesn't necessarily help you because it's not efficient, and too little doesn't get you the output or the profit result that you're looking for. So trying to find that balance is a challenge in itself from that standpoint. But there's a lot of different varieties out there, so you have to do kind of your research there too to figure out what's the most efficient one and getting the nutrients in the ground that you need to grow the crop.
Okay. Oh wow, that was a mouthful. That was a whole lot of information, but I love it because it touched on a lot of tough topics I'm interested in: the business, research, that science, sustainability. But you mentioned the breeding. So I wanted to go back to that because I thought that was really fascinating of how they can breed the bull. So I've heard of the artificial insemination for the bull. So can they take like DNA and like create what they want artificially when it comes to these animals?
Yeah, that's probably a far step away from the general farmer. The general farmer is trying to figure out, how do I get a offspring, if you will, that's able to be efficient on feed and on pasture and grow up as quickly as possible with a good, what we would call marbling if you go buy your steak. So you're basically growing the cow to serve the meat market, or growing the animal to serve the meat market. So you want a good, nice marbling steak or meat product. And that's really what the breeding is based on from that standpoint. So it's a time-based thing. So I want to figure out, how can I get the calf from birth to being, if you will, slaughter weight in the most efficient way possible by using the least amount of feed. So you're looking for the right combination, if you will, of genetics to make that as efficient as possible. So the reality is, when you talk about artificial insemination, so artificial insemination is really more around just taking male with the, I guess, genetic makeup that you're looking for, and inseminating the female to get the offspring or the calf to be able to start the herd. So the balance of artificial insemination is that recognizes that these bulls with these kind of genetics actually command a very high price. So you've got companies that International Bull Semen and other ones like that they buy a very high prospect bull that meets up to the genetic coding that they're looking for. And that's what you're buying, is you're just buying a small piece of that in the semen, so to speak. And you're able to take that, and they're able to take one bull and inseminate numerous numbers of cows. And that's how that business side of it actually works. But it allows the general farmer to not have to invest in such a high price single animal, but you can get a piece of that and spread it across your herd to start building your own from there.
Interesting. Interesting. I never thought about that. Cool. And you talked about the machinery, but I do have a question, because vehicles, you hear about the electric cars. Do they have that in machinery as well, or are they moving towards that?
Well, it's funny you would ask. Is the short answer is yes. It's probably not as far along. Okay. There are tractors out there though, but they're usually smaller horsepower, if you will. Okay. I just saw an article here the other day, looking, just perusing, I guess, the internet and stuff. And it's a manufacturing in California that's actually selling a small, I think it's probably like a 70 horsepower type tractor or so, that's actually out for purchase, that's fully electric. from there. And they had a demonstration on the video and stuff around basically you got electric vehicles, zero emissions, zero noise from that aspect. That's probably the two key pieces for a non-cab tractor for a farmer. You think about going even mowing the yard or mowing a field on a tractor and the exhaust is blowing in your face on some portion as you turn in the field from that standpoint as far as diesel exhaust. Or you're also listening to the hum all day through your ears and stuff. So this eliminates both of those from that standpoint. And it actually, as they were explaining it, it actually has a higher torque off the engine, if you will, from that standpoint. So, and I gotta admit, I haven't dug that deep into it. They're still fairly expensive yet, but I think that's just because it's early in the development. Usually you know, the development goes further and the price starts coming down from that standpoint. So I have seen inklings around other construction equipment, and I really say that just because that means they're getting to where they can have a larger engine from that standpoint and be electrically powered. Pickup trucks and stuff are becoming pretty regularly now between either it's an alternative engine where it's both gas and electric, or turning into electric engines. You're starting to see those starting to get advertised, starting to come to market soon. So without a doubt, I think that's going to continue to progress. It may be a while yet before the larger tractor gets done and gets down into a range where it's affordable for the average farmer, but I could see some of the larger group farmings probably going that way first, without a doubt, depending on kind of what the payout is on the savings.
Okay, and you mentioned climate and weather changes. So let's talk about that, because that is a hot topic regarding climate change. So looking over your history and your time in farming, has the weather in your area of Oklahoma changed? And has it changed enough where you had to adjust how you farm and what you farm?
Definitely had to adjust how you farm from that standpoint. You know, the climate change piece of it, I mean, that's a discussion topic for a lot of people that's probably more in depth with that and studied it more. But from a reality standpoint, I can look at it and I can definitely say that we've had to adjust kind of how we farm and the crops that we grow, without a doubt. As I started this, I started talking about as far as kind of put a pin in the piece around the summer crop that we would do in our area up there. So it used to be unusual, or it was very usual for us to kind of plow the ground, which means we used a mow-board plow that turned the soil over from that standpoint, and you would sow mung beans on top of that, or peas, or something of that nature that was a summer crop. Without a doubt, I don't even think anybody owns a plow in the area anymore unless they own a garden, or if they're, I guess, some of the hardland farmers still have plows from that standpoint, but we're kind of more in a more sandy loam soil. So it'll be hard pressed to find a plow in that area. So that's a pretty dramatic change, because the plow been around since the beginning in Oklahoma from the Dust Bowl area, to be honest. So that part changed, and the other aspect of that is that it was not unusual to have a nice kind of, you know, mild wet summer from that standpoint, where you had good moisture in the ground, able to sow a summer crop and get ample rain on it from there to grow it up. It's pretty tough to see too many summer crops planted in the area now, unless they have kind of like an irrigated setup, or from there, or at least an external water supply to supply water to the crop. So you don't plant, or, you know, it's unusual to plant those. Every once a year, as the year rotates around, you'll get a summer that's got some moisture, and you may see more beans planted in the area or something like that. So you have to find a way to kind of work through that or some way to supplement. Part of that is the cattle piece of it, because there is a nice set of native grass that grows in the area from Bermuda to what we call crabgrass, from that standpoint, that's native to the Oklahoma area, that does pretty good as far as for pasturing cattle. So you start actually trying to, you figure out how to nurture that wild grass, if you will, or the native grass, and grow it up from that standpoint for a summer crop. So in that you make hay, or you just run the cattle on it and the cattle graze the grass. So you've got those two options that you've seen shift. So the area of Oklahoma that I talked about was really years back. If you see, it's always been cattle in the area, but it's actually more prevalent with cow-calf operations now than what you would have seen before. So I've even seen it go through a number of transitions, like I said, from being more cropland to grow cereals, food products, to now planting more for grazing the cattle, to grow the cattle being a large part of the supply. Still cereal farms and cereals being raised in order to resow and resupply the seed necessary for the area for that standpoint. And Oklahoma is very diverse as far as the crops that you're able to produce also. Depending on kind of what region you're in, it changes pretty dramatically around what crops are being sown from that standpoint. But that's probably more generally suited to our area, that it's definitely turned more into cattle country, if you will, in our section of the location and stuff. So without a doubt, the rainfall changes. We see a lot of more wet times, early spring. It's always been rain in the early spring, but it seems like kind of excessive rains now are probably more prevalent. We've got areas of the farms and stuff that's been so wet that it's been, probably maybe 3 years or so since you're able to get a real crop off of it because it gets too wet at the wrong time. Some of that is just the nature of the ups and downs of agriculture. And some of that around when you talk about how dry and the summers can get and stuff, and how bad the droughts are in some areas of Oklahoma. You can see it so dry in some of the other states that it gets so dry that, man, it's nothing left but scorched earth. That is more normal than what I remember growing up from that standpoint. So I would say that's probably the bigger part of the changes that we're seeing, that it's probably more widespread, more usual for those kind of what we would have considered extreme cases before. They seem to be more normal and more of the usual occurrence than what I remember in the past. So it definitely puts stresses on, as you would think, from a financial standpoint, because what you grow off the farm is the income, not only to just further the business, but also for the survival of those farming the land in a lot of cases. So you could imagine that puts a kind of extreme stress on everyone involved from there. So I'm sure we've been fortunate enough that we haven't been in an area that's had such a severe drought as some of what we've seen and heard of from there. But it's definitely one of those that you have to kind of manage your way through, because we've had a few years ourselves where it was either rain came too much at the wrong time and drowned out all the crops, or rain did not come enough at the right time, and still you end up with very little as far as the yield on the crop from there. So it's kind of a balance, and it's kind of the piece of farming I've always told folks, you really have to enjoy doing it, or it's pretty stressful if you don't.
Okay. And so you keep talking about Oklahoma. So tell us, what part of Oklahoma do you farm in?
Well, it's Kingfisher County. So a little town called Dover, from that standpoint, actually between Kingfisher and Hennessy. So the largest city that folks would probably recognize would be Oklahoma City. So it'd be 65 miles northwest of there. As I talked about, it's in a kind of sandy loam soil area, so kind of a easily to dry out type soil from that standpoint.
Okay, so we talked about entering into agriculture. We talked about the different transitions you have to navigate. So now let's talk about sustaining. How are you and your brother sustaining the farm so that it's going to be passed on to the next generation, or just passing the knowledge on to others that are interested in being part of this agriculture industry?
I mean, without a doubt, we're probably I don't know, some people would maybe think it's a strange thing that you've got four brothers who's able to work together. Three of them work external to the farm and live in a different state. One stays in Oklahoma, but we're able to balance out our schedules. We're not necessarily all there at the same time, but we rotate around to where at the right time, one of us or two of us show up and we're able to get the work done and the resources resources needed in order to farm the land and keep things going from that standpoint. So you look at that, and we're each us who have kids, right? So we're trying to get kids, nephews, as far as trying to sit them down and talk to them so they understand. It's not necessarily that they would need to love farming, but the land gets passed down. So they need to know the ins and outs to be able to manage their way through it from that standpoint. So it's not just become a burden of not understanding from there. So definitely it's probably a little bit different. I think about for my kids not growing up on the farm, so they don't have that connection necessarily. So it's a little stranger probably to build it for them. But as far as, I was always fascinated with it growing up. So it made me want to dig into it. As some people read comic books, read about cars. I read about farming from that standpoint, and still do from there. So was always just fascinated with understanding it, how to do things better, how to design stuff. That's probably part of the reason why I'm an engineer, because I love designing stuff for the farm from that aspect. So without a doubt, we're each working on our immediate family. My other brothers, they're working relative to their grandkids. They're pretty young still, but that's the game plan, to try to at least get them indoctrinated around an interest. A lot of times, if you can get interested at a earlier age, it kind of stays with you, and you kind of understand it better, and it doesn't seem that foreign from that aspect. And the most attractive thing from a farming standpoint to me is that it's something that you can own yourself, and that you can manage yourself. So whether you work external or work for another company, to me, it's kind of a little bit of solace of having your own piece that you can manage the way you want, and maybe even practice some of the business things that your own corporate atmosphere doesn't allow you to put into practice, and you can kind of try it out on your own, or vice versa. You can use the same things that you use in the corporate atmosphere and try it out on the farming standpoint. So it's basically like having your own little small business that you're able to invest and kind of put time into and watch it grow.
All right, so thank you for all of that. It is coming to an end. So if somebody wants to connect with you to learn more about farming, if they have questions, if they're in farming and just want to connect with the other farmer, are you on social media? And if so, how can they connect with you?
Yeah, you can definitely look me up on Facebook from that standpoint, under my name, Ivan Caldwell. Yeah, as you can see, I'm more than happy and love kind of talking about it, talking through stuff, ideas around how I got started, how to get started. Those are always fun. Always looking for somebody to kind of impart some knowledge into. So that would be great, actually.
All right, so thank you for that. So you can find him on Facebook under his name, Ivan Caldwell. So this is coming to the end of our show. Thank you, Ivan, for talking to us on the topic of navigating the changes in agriculture. I know I have learned a lot about agriculture and farming, and it has been fascinating. So thank you for joining us today on the Transition Puzzle. Again, my name is Dr. Pamela K. Caldwell with the CAM Group. This is the Transition Puzzle. Thank you, Life Changers, for tuning in again as we talk to our guest, Ivan Caldwell, on the topic of navigating the changes in agriculture. So this comes to the end of the episode. So until next time, just know I am my greatest me, becoming, being, sustaining. Thank you, Ivan, for joining us, and we will see you next time, Life Changers. Bye.
Thanks.